Hello and welcome to our fourth ever episode of Tactica Tuesdays. As always, I am James and joined once again by my co-host Paul. Paul, stop throwing up gang signs, and how are you doing?
Listen, that was not a gang sign. That was not a gang sign. Unless you're really into I don't know, maybe that's I don't know. What gang would that be? Never mind. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I assume it's some kind of accountant gang. That's what I'm just figuring out. But we have another action-packed show for you. Following up the General's Handbook, we are talking about the Sylvaneth release, which I feel like, honestly, we initially had to push it back because we wanted to cover the General's Handbook when that stuff began to break. And I don't think the timing could have been better because now we have the actual full rulebook for the Sylvaneth. We have the points. We can look at it all and discuss it all. We won't be super in depth on that. We'll actually kind of just, briefly, super high level talk about it, mention the abilities, a few of the stuff that we think are the best. But the really in-depth stuff will be covered. I might do it in another video. I know Mitch, MC1 Gamer, will be doing it. You can check it out on his channel, and that Victor, already, which I will link Victor's video below as well, already did an in-depth review on the new Sylvaneth Battle Tome.
But you know is that the Sylvaneth are wicked good now. Holy
absolutely.
Crap!
Yep. Again, General's Handbook isn't out yet. We haven't seen a lot of tournaments run yet with the new kind of point system, but based off of first impressions, looking at the points, looking at the new models, I think Sylvaneth are going to be another one of those top tier teams along with Flesh Eater Courts right out of the gate. But yeah, I mean, it's gonna be exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing how they really perform on the tournament scene. But let's go ahead and kick it off with the news, Paul, because you're going to go first. You have the most interesting things to bring up.
Most interesting item of the day. So I actually have real event news. So it had been discussed before. All of the details hadn't been quite nailed down yet, but the Crossroads GT in Elmira, New York, is coming up September 16th through 18th. Amongst other games, there's going to be Age of Sigmar. Also, if you're into other games, there's going to be Kings of War, Ninth Age, X-Wing, and Malifaux. But, of course, for us, the big highlight event is a nice big Age of Sigmar GT. It's going to be a $50 entry fee. It's going to be located at a Holiday Inn, so we're going to have a nice big space to work in, nice clean area. Don't have to deal with nerd shop smell and all of those sorts of things that go along with that. Nothing is worse than going into a shop and it's just get smacked in the face with nerd flop sweat and Doritos. And if you're at a nice
complete lack of deodorant,
it's classy nerd flop sweat and Doritos. So that's solid. And they have announced that they are definitely using the General's Handbook. They're going to be using the match play system. They have not yet nailed down how many points it's going to be. It sounds like they are working on settling on some number, likely between 2,000 and 2,500. What the exact number is, they're still working on kind of play testing out the General's Handbook and see what number actually is going to work well for a tournament. I played a 2,000 game this weekend, and it was awesome. And I would, at that level, I think even maybe a 1,500 point game for a tournament would be fine. And might make the tournament flow a little faster. So let me think if there's anything else here. They are already accepting pre-registrations. We'll throw a link down below for those of you who are going to be interested in going. Let me put it this way, kids. I'm driving 4.5 hours to go to this GP. You should too. I am doing everything I can to convince every Warhammer YouTuber within a reasonable driving distance to show up. And I'm just really disappointed, by the way, that Andy's new game, the Cheeks, is not going to be released yet by then. Because I would love to have gotten like a nice drunk game of Cheeks in a hotel room recorded with like a bunch of Warhammer YouTubers. That would have been primo. But that's going to have to wait until like another GT at some point.
Or do it at like Gen Con or something like that, right?
Yeah.
The highlight of the entire trip. The Drunken Cheeks plays at 3 a.m.
Yeah, wasted playing a game full of double entendres about asses.
Yep. That sounds pretty good.
Yes, I did pledge to that Kickstarter, and I pledged enough to get a T-shirt.
That's awesome.
Yeah, support your community, kids.
Absolutely. Well, I have nothing quite so exciting. I just have, again, through my connections, I was a former retailer. I still have good relationship with my former distributor and trade rep. So I'm going to screen share real quick. What you may have seen on the Warhammer, Warhammer Age of Sigmar Facebook page. Thank you, Paul. You did it better than I could have. That the Great Hunt is about to begin. And I was like, okay, I have no clue what this is. And then my trade rep sent me kind of the updated list of things that are coming out. I get it every week, about a week or two ahead of when the actual pre-orders come up. But the big thing is that we have the Bone Splitters Savage Orcs, the Orcs themselves, and the Boar Boys coming out, and the Battle Tome Bone Splitters coming out. At the same time as the General's Handbook, of course, will be released, and we have a couple more of the easy to build sets coming out that I think are the same as the Space Marine and Orc from 40K that we've already seen sets come out. We have a Blood Warriors, Blood Reavers, Liberators, and Retributors, each of them retailing at about 15 American that are coming out at the same time. Right. So that's the upcoming products. I wonder if the Boar Boys kits and the other Auric Savage Boys, if they're going to be kind of like the Flesh Eater Courts and have like a few extra bits thrown in there so you can build new units out of them. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect it's going to end up being like, in general, the same size of release as the Iron Jaws was, just with Savage Orcs instead of like building off of Black Orcs.
Yeah, I actually think it'll probably be smaller. I think it'll be like the Flesh Eater Courts where you basically just have repacks and slight additions to the repacks. At least that's just based off of this first little mini 2-model or 2-pack release.
The Savage Orcs certainly are at least really fun. Like they feel like what orcs are supposed to be, just like crazy marauder dudes that are just out to crush skulls. So I'm fully on board for that. Yeah,
always. I think the Oryx bring a lot of needed comedy to the Age of Sigmar and Warhammer universes, just because, especially, like coming from 40K, I'm used to GW games just being so, grim, dark, kind of super serious focus. And then you have the Oryx that bring that nice kind of like beam of light-hearted comedy that just is a nice, balance to that, right?
Yeah. And then you have the Skaven that's kind of like the dark comedy of errors.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. But the orcs are just like, they're so much fun. I loved playing against orcs and goblins in 8th edition, and I wish they had kept more of that flavor in Age of Sigmar. That's like one of my few complaints and regrets about Age of Sigmar, is that they took some of the fun and flavor out of the orcs. Like, you used to just roll a die. For people that didn't play 8th edition, you had to like roll a die every turn for all of your orcs to see if they would just be stupid for that turn and not do anything.
That does sound pretty good. Honestly, the orcs that they just released, what are they called again?
Iron Jaws?
Yeah, the Iron Jaws. They actually I'm considering buying a small force of them just because they look like so much fun to just mess around with. Especially on the Maw Crusher. It's like, what's not to love about this giant, really dumb, but super powerful mount with the massive underbite? I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, he is pretty awesome. But, you know, we did just have that discussion recently, and that segues neatly into our next segment.
Absolutely.
So, you know, James and I were having a little discussion about, you know, new models and all that stuff. And, you know, Allariel, the new Allariel looks pretty sweet and looks like on paper like she's kind of badass, right? Like that beetle looks really dangerous. So the question was, who actually wins in a fight, right? You get Allariel versus Gordrak in a fight. You know, does the beetle win or does the Maw Crusher win? So I ran the numbers on this. And of course, I used averages. So, you know, law of large numbers comes into effect when you have a small sample size. They're going to have variance. But the results are in. Oh, my goodness, the results are in. So let's start with scenario number one here when – well, actually, you want to look at the War Scrolls real quick first? Just to get
I'm actually pulling up Allariel's right now as we speak. Let me go ahead, and I will screen share Allariel. All right. Zoom out.
So,
yep.
So she's got 16 wounds, a 3-up save. So those are our relevant things to talk about for combat. She does have an ability to heal herself. She does have a ranged attack. So that will play into this as well. And she does have a magic attack that can do some damage to them, but slightly less reliably than other things.
Right.
She does throw a decent number of attacks, and those antlers, oh man, they are throwing 5 attacks at Rend 2 for 5 damage when she's at full power. Oh man.
Pretty powerful.
Yeah. So did you have any other thoughts on Allariel for her power level?
Well, for what kind of made me initially think that she might have a shot, right, was the fact that she is quite fast. That's not to say that the Maw Crusher isn't, but she's also quite fast. She has that 30-inch range for her spear. She can do D6 damage with it before he even gets in close. Maybe getting, you know, an attack or 2 off before they close in combat. It is D6 damage at a -2 Ren. It hits pretty well. It wounds pretty well, even though it's only 1 die. The talent of dwindling is not that impressive against something like a Maw Crusher in close combat. But again, as you pointed out, those 5 attacks with a -2 Ren doing 5 damage each. So potential for 25 damage in close combat. That's what really made it stand out to me. And the fact that she can heal up to, or 2d3 wounds each turn, so anywhere from 2 to 6 you know, damage per turn she can kind of just take away from herself.
Right. So there's definitely some strengths there. One of the scenarios that I did not run is her Mystic shielding herself. I did not think to run that one. But taking her to a 2-up save could potentially be a game changer. So maybe in a future episode, maybe I'll have to run those numbers.
Perhaps, but it was so one-sided that I don't think that that's going to be enough to swing it.
Yeah, so you have the Maw Crusher War Scroll up for us as well?
I don't, but I can try to pull it up if you want to start talking about it.
Yeah. All right, so he is also on a 3-up save, 15 wounds, so he is not quite as durable as Allariel. He also has a ranged attack, only 8 inches, but it's a 2-up, 3-up, Rend 1d6 damage. So that thing is very likely just d6 damage. then this guy throws an amazing amount of hits in melee. His melee attacks throw a total of 18 dice.
That is incredible.
Every round of combat, and none of those attacks diminish in number of dice.
What changes with them?
There's only one thing that changes on his damage table that impacts combat, and this is one of the things we'll get into in a moment. But it's just the to hit roll on Big Teeth's Mighty Fists. That starts at a 2-up, and as he takes damage, it eventually goes down to a 6-up.
Can I just stop you for just 1 second and say Big Teeth with the F is such a wonderful name for an orc mount. Like, I have to give GW credit for being creative and staying well within their fluff in terms of this.
Right. Like, it's awesome.
Alrighty, I have it right here.
All right, so I can stop staring at it on my screen. Sweet. Yeah, so you notice in his attacks, there's only one asterisk in there.
Yep.
So his movement is variable, and then his destructive bulk, that's the other thing that's variable. And what does that do? That is impact hits, basically. You roll each one of those dice. On a 4-up, it does a mortal wound when he charges. That's like a backbreaker. That is ridiculous.
I honestly didn't even think about that initially when I was considering the fight. I forgot he had that ability.
Yeah. So yeah, let's what's interesting to me is that his power is mainly front loaded on the number of attacks that he has. And then his rolls to hit and wound are really low. So he has high accuracy on those hits. Not a lot of damage multipliers, but that's okay because he's throwing a crap load of attacks.
Right. And even though none of those attacks are the 5 damage with the -2 rend of that beetle, there's just so many, and with those impact hits, that it probably more than makes up for it.
Right. So I kind of ran 2 different scenarios here. One where Allariel charges first, and one where Gordrak charges first. So let me find where I put that spreadsheet. Hold a moment. All right, here we go. So here is that spreadsheet. Let's go with Allariel charging first, because that's where she should really be shining. So on her first turn,
and she really should be because she's faster. It's more likely.
Right. So assuming she has initiative, she's going first. She shoots off her spell on average. The way I did out the averages, she should be doing on average 2 wounds to it.
Right.
The shooting attack should do 1 wound. And in melee, she should do 6. So that's a total of 9 wounds to Gordrak in the first turn. So that's pretty significantly dropping his power level immediately.
Right.
You're taking off more than half of his wounds.
But the only thing that even affects is those mighty fists and the destructive bulk.
Exactly. So it's really not powering him down that much. So then on the crackback, Gordrak just has his melee attacks, but on average he's going to do 7 wounds back to Allariel.
Right.
So then we flip over. Okay, so we've got 9 wounds taken off of Gordrak. We got 7 wounds taken off of Allariel. Now it's Gordrak's turn. So he uses his shooting attack. He's going to average 1 wound. And then he gets his melee attacks again with an average of 7 wounds. So that's 8 more wounds onto Allariel's, which is already 7. So she's down to 1 wound left already. She's already taken 15 wounds. And this is also doing out the math of the rend and the armor saves and all of that included. So now she's down to 1 wound. All of her attacks are at their weakest levels. So she goes in and has like a nice little sissy fight and will, on average, only do 1 wound back to Gordrak at this point. Excuse me. So now she's sitting on 1 wound. Gordrak, he's taken 10, but he's still got 5 left, right? So then we go back. That's the end of that turn. We go to Allariel has initiative on the next turn. So Allariel shoots. She does her magic. She does her melee. In total, only dealing 4 wounds over to Gordrak. So what's that mean? Gordrak is still left with 1 wound hanging around there. And then Gordrak takes it back to Allariel, doing another 7 damage in melee. So even when we have Allariel on the charge, getting the initiative and getting to use her magic attacks and shooting attacks twice, to Gordrak only being able to use his shooting attack once, Allariel loses. But she does fight valiantly and gets him down to 1 wound. So if Allariel is on the charge, we can make a reasonable case to say if she gets some lucky rolls and Gordrak gets some unlucky rolls, she can easily win this, right? So then let's flip over to our other scenario. What happens when Gordrak charges first? Well, so Gordrak comes in, and first thing that happens is he does his wounds with the destructive bulk. That's going to drop an average of 4 mortal wounds on poor Allariel's head immediately. And she's going to take another wound off from shooting, and then an average of 10 wounds from melee. So you put all that together, on average, when Gordrak charges Allariel, who, by the way, let's just mention here again, she's got a 3-up save, doing 15 damage to her on the charge before she even gets to pull out a knife and go after him. And she gets her attacks back, but she's been so weakened she'll only be able to get about 1 damage back onto Gordrak. So you can see where this is going very, very quickly. If Allariel is on the receiving end of a charge, she does not stand a snowball's chance in hell against Gordrak.
Right.
But if she's the one on the charge, if she gets the initiative, then it's a pretty fair fight. They come out pretty even, with Gordrak having the slight edge. But a few lucky rolls could completely change the game. Plus, the thing that I did not take into account is on the charge, if Allariel Mystic shields herself first, instead of doing wounds to Gordrak with her magic. And let me just take a quick look at how many wounds that's actually dealing out. Yeah, her magic is only doing like 2 wounds a turn. So
right.
if the swing with +1 to her armor is more than 2 wounds, she could probably win that fight.
Yeah.
Which is one of those weird little things, and when you're, choosing what spell to cast in a table scenario. This is, we're doing totally hypothetical. This is just all averages and math and aggregate, and this is just pure math hammer. This is in no way reality. This whole thing, Gordrak could just go and totally rubber lance this thing, and Allariel could kick his ass. That could easily be a thing and happen. But law of large numbers, this is basically how it should fall out.
It's the most likely scenario, basically. Yeah.
Right. But I think the Allariel decision of whether you cast a spell that does mortal wounds to an opposing unit, or if she uses a Mystic Shield to prevent wounds, which one is actually more valuable? Which one are you going to have like a bigger net effect of wounds? Are you going to do more wounds with that magic missile type spell, or are you going to prevent more wounds with the Mystic Shield? And on the flip side of that too is, do you care? Like, will that magic missile take a unit out so that you don't even need the Mystic Shield? Or will you knock that unit down enough so that then you can go in and charge and wipe out that unit and not need the Mystic Shield?
Right.
Variety.
I know I tend to lean towards Mystic Shield myself because more often than not, I feel like you can prevent more wounds in most scenarios than the up to 3 that you're dealing out with that bolt. That's not always, but I just said more often than not.
Yeah. Personally, I like to lean towards having a crap load of wizards on the table and having the freedom to Mystic Shield and buff and buff and buff again. So that's just kind of how I roll. But we don't all play armies with, Swiss Army wizards that can do whatever you want them to do.
Right. Some of us just have the immovable wall of zombies instead.
Yeah. Yes. All right.
So I think you answered that well.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes me want to go out and buy an Iron Fist army, or Iron Jaws army, rather.
Right.
Like that Maw Crusher is a beast.
I want 2 Allariels personally. I want one to make as Allariel and one to use that beetle for something else.
Yeah, just like find some other unit that could be easily represented as a beetle and just have like a squad of beetles going across the board. And
that would be pretty cool.
There had to be some like B horror movie where that happened, and we can just reenact that, and it'd be awesome. First, we need to find the terrible movie, and then we need to reenact it.
Yep.
So, moving right along to other things that are slightly less nonsensical
and slightly less B-rated.
Yes. Well, we're like Warhammer Weekly. They try and do like A-level stuff at a C level, and we're aiming for like maybe a B- level.
Right.
So, solid just enough to put it up on the fridge that your mom will be proud of you.
So with that introduction, of course, we come to the spotlight section, and I would never insult any of these content producers by calling their content B-level stuff.
No, these are the A-level people that we should all aspire to be like, and should, you should all go watch their shows first and then watch ours as you're coming down off of their high of awesomeness.
I wasn't going to go that far, Paul, but sure. Just take a dump on our own show. If you want to lead us off, Paul, with your spotlight of the week.
All right. So my spotlight this week is none other than Mr. Doom and Darkness. He did a great battle report that he put up just a couple of days ago. And what initially lured me in, and I don't watch that many battle reports, just to be totally honest with you, I just have a hard time getting into them sometimes. But he happened to have a battle report against Free People. And I was like, I can't say no to this. I have to watch the Free People battle report, right? And I found myself not actually watching the battle report, just listening to it. And I realized suddenly, I think Doom and Darkness may possibly be my favorite battle reporter for Age of Sigmar right now. He goes in depth into his thought process and why he makes the decisions that he makes. And I think that's, for me anyway, that's what makes for a really good battle report. And having that kind of commentary, that's what makes you a better player, I think. Going through what somebody else is thinking and gives you ideas, and also gives you the what the hell are you thinking, and that what the hell are you thinking is you growing and learning yourself and being able to identify bad plays as they happen.
I'll definitely have to check him out. I haven't watched any of his battle reports yet, but I do enjoy that a lot more too than just watching either the slideshow pictures and just a summary with no explanation of the tactics behind it, or just watching dice roll whenever it's kind of in real time.
Yeah.
There's only so much of that kind of thing I can watch. My spotlight of the week is also tactics related. William Page, whose channel is Creative Name to Stand Out, and the name does stand out because it's out there, right? He does a series, they're all very short, kind of bite-sized videos called Age of Sigmar or AOS Close-Ups, and they're great. I have it right here. As I talked to Paul before the show, this is basically, you know, my painting desk Bible, if you will. It's always right here by me. I've read through it several times. I'm continuing to take some notes and get ready to continue into the Unlocking the Keys to Wargaming series, which is all based upon the Art of War book. And really, these Age of Sigmar close-ups are really quick, bite-sized little bits where you can either learn more about your own army, or for myself, what's more the case is learn a little bit more about the capabilities of my opponent's armies and models that I'm likely to come up against, so that as we're laying down the models on the table, I don't even have to look them up. I can be like, okay, I know this guy can do this. This guy's a threat in this other way. This guy can do, you know, X, Y, Z or whatever. And it makes you, as a general, better prepared before the game even starts. Because really, the game is started whenever you're list building, but the chess match of sorts really begins during that deployment at the beginning of the table, beginning of the game. And so that helps you better prepare at really kind of phase 2 of the game.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I feel like that's an area of my own game that I really need to step up. Is I spend a lot of time analyzing my own army, and I think I need to spend more time looking at other armies to understand how they work, what things are priority targets, what units are threats. And when we get to a later segment of our misplay of the day, we'll find out why.
For me, it's kind of just force of habit. When I played the Lord of the Rings game, which I played for 16 years, I had a playable army of good size for literally every faction in the game. And part of that was I wanted to experience and play around with them myself so that I knew better how to beat them. Age of Sigmar, that's a little bit more of a cost-prohibitive thing than it was in SBG. So I may not ever get there, but at least I can still study them and be prepared with videos like the Age of Sigmar close-ups. But that brings us to our main topic, because if you're not playing the new Sylvaneth army, this is your opportunity to learn your enemy. Because as Sun Tzu said, know your enemy and know yourself, and in 100 battles, you'll never be in peril, and that's what we're all preparing for. So, Paul, let's go ahead and dive on in to the brand new Ent faction, the Sylvaneth.
You want Ents because this is how you get Ents.
Exactly.
Oh, so good.
Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on Allariel or a lot of these other units. Allariel simply because we touched on her already for the kind of one-on-one versus Gordrak, the big face puncher. He's no longer Fist of Gork. He's been upgraded to face puncher. But, you know, Allariel is clearly the big bad of this faction. She's, in my opinion, the strongest piece that Order can bring to the table. The versatility of that beetle in terms of, like, if you're playing any kind of mission that has fortifications or destroying like a realm gate or something, it's obviously supremely well talented for that. The fact that she can heal the different allied units that are within her army with her magic and her command ability, where she can, or not command ability, but her ability where she can roll a die and either heal herself and everyone else or summon in dryads or summon in tree lords, things like that, is all really, really, really powerful. But the one that I wanted to talk about the most and focus on the most is the one that I'm honestly the most excited about, because next to Allariel, I feel it's the most powerful piece that came out with this new Sylvaneth release, and that is the Spirit of Durthu, which interestingly enough is not a unique hero, like the old Durthu was, but he's really powerful. Trying to get the stupid thing to actually open. My computer doesn't want to open up his war scroll. There we go.
Might be
now
now.
Yeah. Now we can screen share to it. Alrighty. So we have here the Spirit of Durthu. For some reason, it always wants to overly zoom in. I'm sorry, I don't have that bad an eyesight computer. That's not necessary. But I really feel like this guy, he's rocking at 400 points, so he is expensive. He is a hero and leader, so you can take him as that. We have right down here all these keywords: monster, hero, Spirit of Durthu. But before you even get to his abilities, like his, his special abilities and all, you can just see why this guy is impressive. His Verdant Blast, we're looking at 6 attacks at 15-inch range, a 4/3 -1 Ren for D3 damage. That has good potential. But man, that Guardian Sword starting out at a 3-inch range, 3 attacks, 3/3 -2 for 6 damage, not D6, but 6 damage. That is really, really impressive.
That hurts. And because, just to point out real quick, just in the new match play rules, because he's not unique and because he is a leader in the General's Handbook, right?
Yeah. I can double check that, but I'm pretty sure.
So that means he can take artifacts.
Let's see. Yep, Spirit of Durthu is a leader behemoth.
Yes. So you can power this guy up more.
Yep.
And, he is in order. So if you just go with the generic order command traits and artifacts, you can just throw on an extra attack on his Guardian Sword.
Or up the rend even more.
Yeah.
Just
personally, I would go with the extra attack when it's already at rend 2.
But imagine if you made it, because is it a +1 to the rend or 2?
It's a +1.
Okay, I was thinking it was +2 for some reason. I was like, man, with that, it's basically you're basically turning his regular attack into mortal wounds. If it was a -4.
Yeah. Oh man, but that's like if you could just turn that into 4 instead of the 3, then you're like almost guaranteeing that you're going to get one of those through every time and just whap 6 damage.
Well, it's funny that you should mention that, because if we look right here at the ability Guardian Sword, you basically have that. The Spirit of Durthu makes an extra D3 attacks when he is within 3 inches of a Sylvaneth Wildwood when he attacks in the combat phase. And there's a lot of instances in which you will be within 3 inches of a Sylvaneth Wildwood, especially because if you decide, again, this is unfortunately not pairing well with what Paul was saying of the taking the kind of generic order one, I guess like faction bonuses that you can get, because this does require that you have the just the Sylvaneth one, but you get to place a free Sylvaneth Wildwood after all the other pieces of terrain have been set up, and it just has to be more than 1 inch away from any other piece of scenery on the table. So that's pretty likely that it'll happen. Obviously, his other abilities are quite good. We have the ground shaking stomp, to where you can potentially knock down everyone that he's in combat with. And notice that it doesn't say anything again about model size. Last week I pointed that out quite a bit with different command abilities and artifacts and all that people could take. So even your opposing monsters and behemoths, unless there's something somewhere in the General's Handbook that I have not yet seen, can even be knocked off their feet and take this -1 from all their hit rolls in that combat phase that's coming up. And this is at the start of every combat phase, not just yours. So that's obviously a good defensive ability. You have Impale, which is, the ability for you if you inflict a wound on an enemy model with his massive impaling talons, which is only 1 attack, but a decent chance of success. You'll die, and if it exceeds the opponent's number of wounds remaining, you can insta-kill it. So even big, scary monsters, he can potentially kill them in 1 turn without even reducing their wounds to 0 by himself because of that Verdant Blast and the Guardian Sword hitting with those before you do the massive Impaling Talons. So there's a good chance of that.
This guy is just nasty all around. And he's not unique. And
no.
not unique.
Yep.
Since we brought it up, do you have the Sylvaneth traits and artifacts available at hand so we can talk about those?
I have them, but I can't share them.
Okay, but that's fine. We can just talk about them.
Okay. Well, the command traits, we have Realm Walker, which is if your general uses the Navigate Realm Roots ability, add 2 to the dice results, which I'll real briefly cover that. As we've talked about in the General's Handbook video, each of the Grand Alliances got access to their basically faction ability where they had the one unique thing for each of them, like Death Faction had basically a 6-up ward save for their entire army that was so long as everything was within 10 inches of a hero. For the Sylvaneth, basically you get the Sylvaneth models within 3 inches of a Wildwood, and then you can teleport them to any other Sylvaneth Wildwood so long as that's more than 9 inches away from enemy models. And you roll a die with that, and on a 1, basically they couldn't go through and they just can't do anything that turn. You have the 2 through 5, which is safe passage to where they go through, and that counts as their movement. And then you have the 6 plus where you can move through to the other Wildwood and then move again. And so the Realm Walker is nice because basically it means your general will never roll a 1 for that and is got basically a 50-50 chance of getting to move again after he teleports through, which is clearly a very nice ability in a game that's so movement driven like Age of Sigmar. You have Gnarled Warrior, which gives you, similar to the Lizardmen, you ignore the enemy's rend unless it's a -2 or better. You have the Gift of Gyrin, which is your general heals 1 wound at the at the start of each of your hero phases, or D3 if you're within 3 inches of a Wildwood. You have the Lord of Spites. You can re-roll your first failed hit roll made for your general in each phase, not each turn, but each phase. You have War Singer, which is you can add 1 to any charge rolls made for friendly Sylvaneth units that are within 10 inches of your general. So that's not bad. And Wisdom of the Ancients, friendly Sylvaneth units within 10 inches of your general, add 1 to their bravery during the battle shock phase. So those are all pretty good. In addition, I think
adding the bravery is pretty weak in general.
Right. Right.
Compared to the compared to like, okay, teleport all around the map. +1 bravery kind of sucks.
Yep. Again, it's just one of those things, like if you're playing an event that requires that you roll, at least it's something, right?
Yeah.
And so many of these new Sylvaneth units are multi-wound, like the Stormcast, so bravery will not be as big of an issue unless it's like a Dryad or something.
Yep. That's true. Now, what do their artifacts look like?
Let me flip through to them. Also, I'm just going to note, not going to read through them, except for I'll mention one of them, that they have, the Sylvaneth have access to their own unique spells. And so basically, like you'll have certain instances where heroes will be able to pick a spell in addition to Arcane Bolt, Mystic Shield, and maybe a unique one that they already have. In addition, some of the War Scroll battalions give unique spells to your general. But the artifacts are, if I can get that to pull up, there we go. Dyth's Reaper, where, oh yeah, pick one of this one should be paired, Paul, with this guy. Pick one of this hero's melee weapons to be the Dyth's Reaper. When making attacks with this weapon, any rolls of 6 or more have a rend characteristic of -4. Basically mortal wounds. Yeah.
Oh my god.
We have the Oaken Armor. Add 1 to any save rolls made for this hero. So if you gave that, for example, to this Spirit of Dirthu and you cast Mystic Shield on him, he's basically ignoring a good amount of rend. Obviously, you can't make him that 1-up, so that's a bit redundant at that point. But again, that's if you know you're going into a situation where there's Rend coming against you.
Right. I mean, it turns into like what 1-up saves were in 8th edition, where it's like that extra buffer for, having your armor taken down.
Yep. Next, we've got Briar Sheath. Your opponent must subtract hit rolls made against this model. I'm sorry, subtract 1 from the hit rolls. It's all hit rolls, not just close combat. You have the Seed of Rebirth, which is similar to the Death Faction's ring that allows them to come back when they die. You heal D3 wounds, which is, of course, not bad. I don't think it's as useful for them, just because there's so many less ways for heroes in this faction to heal. Then we've got the Wraithstone, subtract 1 from bravery of all enemy units within 10 inches of the bearer during the battle shock phase. Good against things like Skaven, but not necessarily game-breaking in most cases. And then Glamour Weave, which is roll a die each time this unit suffers an unsaved wound or mortal wound. On a 6-up, it's ignored. So again, something that kind of parallels the Death Faction with that whole 6-up, basically ward save. And I just wanted to real quickly talk about the Tree Song spell, because it's amazing. Basically, it has a casting value of 7, and you pick a Sylvaneth Wildwood within 10 inches of the caster. It does its Roused ability, where it potentially inflicts mortal wounds on anything other than a Sylvaneth unit that's inside of it. And then after that, you roll 2 dice, and you can move it, the Wildwood, that many inches in any direction, as long as you're not moving it within 3 inches of any enemy models or other terrain features. And any units that are wholly within the Wildwood at this time get moved with it. And the only way that you can't move it is if a unit is partially within the woods. So you can take something for a ride, whether it's yours or your opponent's.
So what I'm gathering from all of this in general is that the Sylvaneth are all about like hit and run, teleporting around the board, extra buffs to movement in weird creative ways. Yeah, like this army is going to be nasty.
Yes, I'm looking forward to just fighting against it, because it's going to be so unique compared to everything else thus far in Age of Sigmar. It's going to be very much a hit and fade kind of army that you will be able to counter it. Obviously, as I mentioned before, the whole basically teleporting from one wooded area to another is limited in that you can't teleport to a wooded area and be within 9 inches of an opponent's unit when you do so. So your opponent, especially, again, for Death, or even for you, Paul, really with your free people, we can just take off chaff units and basically camp them at different wildwoods that we don't want the Sylvaneth to come through.
Right. The other interesting thing is the way those teleportation abilities are worded. They say that you take them off the board and then you set up the unit in a Sylvaneth Wildwood or next to a Sylvaneth Wildwood, right? So that would trigger a Gryph-hound's ability to take shots at that unit when it comes in.
Yep.
So just throwing it out there, Gryph-hounds are 40 points. I mean, just for the sheer metagaming of, Stormcast, Deep Strike, like half of Chaos summons, Death summons like crazy, Sylvaneth are teleporting all over the place, Seraphon summon. It seems like running a Gryph-hound or two, if you have that extra flex 40 points in your list, just jam one of those in there if you're playing Order.
Right. Yeah, I think that's definitely a safe, or not safe, but a wise thing to do.
Yeah,
because
I gotta get on eBay and buy me a couple.
Right. Especially with the Silver Tower having come out, they're probably more readily available for cheap.
Right.
The only other unit that I really wanted to cover in depth is the Kurnoth, or however you want to pronounce them, Hunters. because honestly, I love the look of these units. They basically look like miniature tree lords, and I like their little companion beetle guys. And I've made the connection before that I feel like the Sylvaneth, in terms of their base stat lines, are very similar to the Death faction, at least a lot of different units. Like the Dryads are almost the exact same as Crypt Ghouls. Just the Crypt Ghouls are a little bit more offensively focused, and the Dryads are a little bit more defensively focused, but their basic stat line is only a few points away from each other. And the Kurnoth Hunters, they look like they are going to play a lot like the old Ushapti from the Tomb Kings. Man, Vince would have been mad at me if I forgot what faction that was from. And it would be foolish of me, especially after saying it so many times in that one video. But I like them. I mean, they're not amazing, but I think that they bring some needed things to the faction. Now, obviously, with Allariel and with the Tree Lords and all, you have some shooting attacks, but those are all really, really, really expensive to get a hold of. And these Kurnoths, if that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure. They're rocking 30-inch range with 2 attacks. Again, only hitting 50% of the time and only wounding, 2/3 of the time once they hit for D3 damage. It's not amazing, but it's good. But the thing is that you get 3 of them for 180. So I feel like that's worth paying if you are playing an army that doesn't necessarily have a lot of shooting. I think that maybe that's a little bit over. I mean, they're 5 wounds each and all. They're pretty nice models in terms of like their base stat lines. But I think 180, if you ignore the fact that you're kind of paying a premium for that additional range to your army, is a little bit high, but maybe not.
Yeah, what I find interesting with these guys is that they're not like your typical shooty unit. Like most of the time, your units that will have like a bow or something like that, like if they get into melee, they're just screwed. Right, you just might as well just pick them off the table.
Right.
These guys, when they're rocking their great bow, they've got their vicious claws attack instead of their scythe or their great sword, but they're still throwing 3 attacks at 4-up, 4-up.
Right.
These things have 5 wounds and a 4-up save. So
and then at the end of the combat phase, they can potentially inflict mortal wounds with their trample underfoot.
Right. So not only are these guys effective shooters hitting you at range, they can hang in close combat too, which is really interesting.
Yep.
Like that's the kind of unit that I dig. Like that's why I really like these guys is they're versatile. Like they're that unit that can shoot, and with that 30-inch range, you would think, oh man, I should just hang these guys back. But no, you should just chase stuff all over the board and shoot everywhere.
Yep. And really, even once you're in combat, you've got right here the Tanglethorn Thicket, where you can choose to not charge, and they can't move in except for to pile in 1 inch, but they can re-roll failed save rolls, so that's obviously good. Yeah. And then they always count as being within range of your general for the purposes of any command abilities used. And then they're basically a bubble, so you've got the 8 inches around them where every other Sylvaneth unit basically gains access to those too. So they do a lot of good things for your army, and they're supposed to be kind of like the Rangers, right, for their faction. They're going out scouting, operating independently, and I feel like their rule set really reflects that. Yeah,
and looking at like if you decide to take these as a melee unit instead of a shooting unit, man, do these guys pack a punch.
Oh yeah. All right, I'm going to ask you, because we talked about it before the show. I asked Paul which way does he lean. Does he lean a bit more towards the variance in damage or the D3, D6s kind of thing? I mean, that's more the variance, or the more guaranteed thing where it's the preset 2 damage, right? Kind of in the middle. So if you're running these as a melee one, are you taking the Kurnoth Greatswords or are you taking the Scythes?
That's a really interesting question because when you look across the stat line, right, you've got D3 damage is going to average out law of large numbers to 2. So your damage is the same. Your to hit and your to wound are the same. So you're looking at rend versus attacks. Rend 2, like a difference of 1 Rend versus a difference of 1 attack. That's a really tough question. And, I have never actually run the numbers specifically just on that. And I think it's going to depend on what your armor save of your opponent's going to be.
Right. But let's say you don't know that. Let's just say you're going up to it, you're taking this to a tournament, and you're like, I've got to model the models with what they're going to have in game. And let's just say you for whatever reason you chose not to, or you can't magnetize. You've got to pick one. There's no fence sitting in this one, Paul.
No fence sitting. I think I would go with the scythes, because Rend 2 on a melee weapon is really strong, and I feel like only losing 1 attack for that. And then you get the D3 on the back end, so you have that extra variability to potentially make up for the less attacks. So I would say I would go with the scythes.
I think that's a good choice. For me, it's the scythes, hand down. I understand again that the great sword has 1 more attack, and let's say hypothetically that you do know your opponent beforehand, and you do know that they're all rocking 5-up, 6-up kind of armor saves, then the Rend 1 is fine against that. And you're on average, like you said, going to do more damage with the 4 attacks at a damage of 2 as opposed to the 3 attacks at D3. But just in general practice, that Rend of -2 is so powerful. I have the, I acknowledge the psychological aspects of the game and the fear that certain things can put into your opponent or into you. And when I see a Rend value of -2 or greater, that terrifies me. I mean, that's taking a 3-up save to a 5-up, a 4-up save to a 6-up, a 5 or a 6 don't even exist anymore. It's just, that's powerful. That much of a change. I mean, we're looking at, basically a 33% change roughly, to your, drop in your opponent's armor save likelihood. That's huge.
And the other interesting thing about that too is that it's a little bit metagame dependent too. If you have a lot of players in your area that are running armies that or units that have abilities that ignore Rend 1, then definitely go with that Rend 2, because that's just like they're going to ignore the Rend 1, so it's not even there, right?
Right.
So as well, like Seraphon have that ability commonly.
Yep.
So if you go with the Rend 2, not only do you have better Rend, it's one of the rare models in your army that's actually going to punch through their armor at all.
Yep. Yep. The other things I wanted to briefly touch on for them, because again, I don't want to go super deep dive and take forever, because there's a lot in the book. It's worth a read. You can pick it up for pretty cheap if you don't mind just having the digital copy for your app for like, it's about 20 American after tax. Is the cheapest one you can get away with. And of course it ranges up to the 50 for the hardback book at your store before any kind of discounts are applied. But one thing I thought was interesting is a lot of they have new War Scroll battalions, right? And each of them, they have their little ones like everybody else does with only a couple units, and they give an ability here or there, and most of them are pretty good. But then they have several different larger ones that are similar to, like the Flesh Eater Courts had their one super mega one that was like every other battalion in the book. And then it's like you took all those abilities from each of those and you got additional ones. Now there's the one like that, and then there's a couple that are kind of like a step down from that I thought were really interesting, because each one of these other kind of mid-level battalions, War Scroll battalions that are made up of smaller ones, they'll have like a very small minimum requirement in terms of like 1 or 2 of the smaller War Scroll battalions to make them up, and then they grant additional abilities. But then they'll have a big long list of like 0 to 1, 0 to 2, 0 to 3s that you can add. And then literally at the end of it, it says any number of Sylvaneth units, which is important because that means that you can just make your entire army that and gain those abilities. And I was like, that's huge. I mean, normally you bring like a War Scroll battalion or even, you know, one that's kind of like a larger, I guess, like tent, right? And it has a few of the smaller War Scroll battalions in it, but only those units gain those abilities. But this allows for your entire army to gain this additional ability. It's just like, just bring these and then whatever the heck you want to add to it of Sylvaneth.
Yeah, that's just like, I don't know, man. That's, and what is the ability that you get that you can then just put on any of your units?
Like, well, it depends, because there's like 5 different ones of these.
Oh my god.
Yeah, and the other thing I thought was really interesting is each one of these has the ability for you to bring in something from the Order Grand Alliance, but outside of the Sylvaneth, and include it within this War Scroll battalion, and keep your army considered Sylvaneth pure, so you gain access to all the Sylvaneth command abilities and you know, relics and all this stuff. Like, for example, the Gnarl Root Wargrove allows you to bring an Order Wizard into your force as well. And then there was one that allows you to bring, like, I think it was like a dwarf unit. And then I think there was another one that allows you to bring an elven unit. And there's certainly those that allow you, excuse me, allow you to bring different Stormcast. And so it's like, there's a lot of, you know, kind of variability that you can bring to your army and kind of give these other order units and kind of use them to plug maybe the holes that you believe the Sylvaneth have as an army.
Like,
so these are powerful.
And, you know, dropping some artillery in there and shooting everything off the board and then teleporting in and cleaning it up.
Yeah, why not, right?
Oh man, that's really interesting. That's probably the like sign of things to come, that all of these new things that they're putting out are going to be like, yeah, like here is the exception to the rule about faction purity in this War Scroll. Like,
yeah,
that's going to be a whole lot of awesome.
Let me see real quick if I can find that one that had the dwarf unit in it, because like I said, there's like 5 of these kind of mid-level ones. I just want to see if it says. Okay, let's see. This one has. No, this one doesn't have that one. Okay, there's quite a few, but I think it's the Ironbark one. Let me see, because that would make sense, right, to include a dwarf unit in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, 0 to 2 Duarden units. Do the organ guns and stuff, do those count as Duarden?
I don't think anything that got moved to the Ironweld Arsenal does. But
okay.
All of the old stuff that got discontinued, like the Grudge Thrower and the Flame Cannon and the Bolt Thrower, all still have that Duarden keyword because they just got discontinued. So, like, you can just, okay, I got some artillery now.
Yeah, there's this one in particular has some pretty powerful abilities. For example, you have the number of casualties when working out the result for a battle shock test to any Sylvaneth units rounded around the fractions up. You have mastercrafted weapons, which is you can reroll wound rolls of 1 for enchanted blades, protector glaives, or greenwood scythes used by the tree ravens and branch witches. And then you have this new magical artifact, which is the Iron Talisman. Forged by the Duarden, this Taladin lets you add 1 to all wound rolls made for the bearer's melee weapon.
Wow.
And yeah, and that's, you know, the entire battalion, and it's all Sylvaneth. So yeah, that's pretty impressive. That's just, of course, one example of the like 5 or 6 different similar ones like that that are in the book.
So my one observation kind of coming away from this is that it seems like they give, like, all of this new stuff that comes in the Sylvaneth book gives them a whole bunch of new special powers that no other faction has yet.
Yep.
And that seems like that's just going to make, at least for a little while, the Sylvaneth are going to be wicked OP. Like, they are just rip everybody apart.
Yeah, until people figure out how to counter what they're bringing, they will definitely be top tier.
Yeah, and until other books come out with all of the rules for everything else, which I mean, we can only hope that other stuff's going to come out, but I kind of feel like, you know, a book for free people that has all this crap in it is just like never going to come. It's going to be like the next Bretonian book. Like, it's just not going to happen.
I don't know. I mean, it may be a little bit because I'm sure that free people are pretty low down the list of priorities.
Yeah, exactly. That's the big problem. They're a lower priority list.
But I think they'll eventually get there. I mean, you know, if they take a lot of this stuff, like these artifacts and these command abilities and all this stuff, is very similar to 40K, and so I assume that they're following that model somewhat. These releases, again, are also very similar to how they do 40K. So I would suspect that they'll eventually get an update because, again, in 40K, everything does eventually, no matter how popular or not it is. Unless, of course, it falls below the point of profitability, then they'll discontinue the army like the Tomb Kings and all. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen to free people as a whole. I honestly think y'all are going to get some expansions. I think that the story really has set it up for that in the narrative. We have too many very unique tribes that are not well represented by the models that we currently have or by the rules for them. So I would expect you to get some good variants, right? Like, we've already encountered in the novels quite a few like kind of shamanistic tribes, and we've encountered the devoted of Sigmar that are very much similar to the Empire and Bretonia. They're these very well organized martial groups that fight alongside the Stormcast. So have hope.
Yeah.
They're not dead yet.
Yeah, I think my greatest hope is that they just release a new book in a few months that just has all of that in it.
Yeah.
For like everything.
Yeah. I bet it'd be further than a few months.
Yeah. What I find interesting though is like the Stormcast already got 2 books.
Yep.
Right? We got the first Stormcast book and then we got the Extremist Chamber. And like they're like the poster boys of everything for Age of Sigmar, and they didn't get the first book that has all of the new artifacts and command traits and magic and all of that stuff. So number one, that's weird.
Yeah.
And number two, I mean, does that mean we're going to get like a 3rd Stormcast book? And do we really need another Stormcast book?
No, what they really need to do is roll the 2 together a bit more nicely than they currently have it. I honestly think from a gameplay perspective, it's ridiculous that they're separate. I think that the main Stormcast need the Extremists, and I think the Extremist needs the main to even be remotely competitive. I think they're both too hyper-specialized in their particular fields, and they fill the weaknesses of the other one so much that you have to really bring them together.
Yeah, definitely. I absolutely agree.
Yep.
Stormcast are kind of not a complete army if you don't like cross the Extremist Chamber barrier.
Yep. So that's going to be all that we touch on for the Sylvaneth for this one. Again, like I said at the top of the show, Mitch, MC1 Gamer, is doing a deep dive. I very well may do a bit more of a deep dive, breaking down aspects of it. I'm not 100% sure on time for that. And like I said, Victor already did a review of the entire book, so you can check that out as well, which will be linked below. But now that we've finished the main topic, we come to everyone's favorite segment. Paul, will you please do the intro and get us moving on to Misplay of the Day?
All right, so we can break out my dunce cap for my incredible Misplay of the Day. So I played a 2,000-point game over the weekend against Skaven, and everything was looking great for the first 2 turns. First turn was mainly just kind of moving stuff around, getting stuff set up for charges and all that. Turn 2, bam! I charge in, I clear out Chaff with shooting. I totally demolish his screens, and then I go in, charge in with like I lost 1 demigriff to shooting earlier on, but 5 demigriffs fly into a unit of 30 storm vermin, right, and blow up 25 of them in 1 turn. And
wow.
Yeah, and I had like already also gotten rid of all his screens and his chaff, and so like after that, it was like there wasn't even that much left on the table. Like he had some rat ogres I was going to have to deal with. He had a doom wheel I still had to deal with. A couple of characters, but the one thing that I completely screwed up and wasn't thinking about was the one unit hanging out in the backfield that I really didn't pay attention to. And that was his Screaming Bell. That just rained destruction down on my army. As soon as I was done just ravaging through all of those little rats with spears and knives, it just did insane things to all of my troops. And I got stuck in like quagmires of last little battles that I probably should have retreated from, and didn't throw attacks onto the Screaming Bell until it was too late and I realized how powerful it was. He also had a Warp Lightning Cannon that I never went after, and that was, area denying like half the board. So that was, I think, my major misplay of the day, was really just underestimating the key components of my opponent's army. And just like, yeah, it made absolute mincemeat out of those rats, right? But then I actually ended up losing the game because I couldn't control that Screaming Bell. Like between that and the Warp Lightning Cannon, it just ripped me apart. All of my units that I had left, it was like, okay, I was out of charge bonuses. I got all of my knights and everything got ripped through. I had my flank was taken out by rat ogres. My other flank took a bunch from, taking out the doom wheel, and then that charged in, and those knights just kind of fell apart, and the demigryphs were all just shattered by the Screaming Bell. So all I had left was like my core troops, which were like a unit of 20 swordsmen that were really supposed to be defensive, not offensive, and a unit of 10 halberdiers, which were really to fill a battle line slot and it as cheaply as possible. So I was basically like totally screwed after I lost my offensive units. And then he like targeted his Warp Lightning Cannon at my handgunners, which would have been like my last hope. Took out like 6 of them, and then I lost like 6 more to Battle Shock. And it was terrible. It was so bad. So lesson learned: know your opponent's army. If it's big and shiny, you probably should kill it.
Especially with the Skaven, because they like shiny.
Yes. But the big shiny centerpiece models are like always the most dangerous thing on the board in Age of Sigmar. Like you got to clear those.
So you already said that the Skaven player won. So I think the question everyone wants to know is, did the opponent roll the all-important 13 on those 2 dice with the Screaming Bell at any point?
No, he did not.
Because if he did, he's cheating, which if it's good, a good Skaven player always does, right?
He was using GD Skaven dice.
He was?
Yeah.
Well, that explains it. They were clearly weighted dice.
Yeah. That game was fantastic overall, though. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed that game. I took my lumps. I gladly conceded at the end of it. It was probably the best game of Age of Sigmar that I have ever played in terms of like level of enjoyment, level of tactics and strategy. Like it was really good. So I hope that the General's Handbook is just going to continue to up that constantly and give me more opportunities to embarrass myself.
I think it will. I think it will for sure. And it gives nerds like us, right, just the opportunity to sit there and nitpick with our fine little combs through the sand and be like, okay, this one's better than this one, and this one, it becomes better when you pair it with this commander and all that stuff, right? It gives us more to do that is hobby related whenever we are otherwise preoccupied and unable to participate in our hobby in other ways.
Oh yeah, those army list spreadsheets have come back out, baby. Oh yeah, the list building is back. My wife used to like give me like smacks in the middle of the night because I would be like up on my phone building army lists at like midnight while she was trying to go to sleep. And I think that may be coming back soon. As soon as there's a good app for army building with the General's Handbook, which, I mean, crossing my fingers, I hope Games Workshop gives us that. Like,
yeah.
That's got to be in the works somewhere. But yeah, that will be a thing.
No, I understand. That's definitely me. Like the day before I have a game, even if it's just a friendly game, right? Not even like a tournament game. I'm sitting there up until midnight. Like I have my list that I've already decided on, but I'm like, no, I got to build like 4 or 5 other lists that are completely different and make sure that this is the best one that I want to bring. Yeah, that'll definitely be in full effect with this handbook coming out again. Well, Paul, do you have any other points that you want to touch on real quick before we go and wrap her up?
No, I think that's about it. It's been another fun-filled episode.
Absolutely. Watch where you bring those axes because you know that Ents and other tree creatures do not like them. That's already been detailed quite heavily in the fluff. But if you're fighting them and if you're Khorne, have at it, right? You are perhaps the best equipped to deal with this Sylvaneth menace with all of your giant, oversized, potentially quite devastating to wooden creatures' axes.
Blood for the blood god, sap for the syrup god.
Exactly. And if you're Nurgle, you're happy just to, consume it and change it to your own disgusting, putrid ways. But that's gonna do it for this other episode of Tactica Tuesdays. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Paul, for joining me once again. I know it's particularly late for you, but
whatever.
Until next time, happy gaming, guys.